Hello and welcome back to the Life on the Wrist. Today we're going to dive into two 1970s watches and a 1950s watch to contrast the designs that we saw come out of the 1970s. Watches manufactured in the 1970s can be hit or miss with collectors. Some find the case designs interesting and exciting, others find the designs odd and hard to wear. Slowly but surely, more and more collectors are becoming interested in watches from this era. The large cushion-shaped cases are wearable and have a modern feel to it, so I thought I would go through a couple of them that would be interesting to learn about. As you can see, I've got three pieces with me here. And as I always do, we will have just a brief overview in this video and then in-depth videos to follow. We'll start with the watch over here on the right side. This watch is an Eterna matic in stainless steel with a really attractive blue dial. This Eterna was manufactured in the 1970s and has a stainless steel case that's in fairly good condition. You can see it follows many of the design aspects that I sort of described, which is a cushion-shaped case with short lugs. The case has, as I mentioned, sort of this square TV-shaped cushion case with short flat lugs. The crown of this watch is unsigned, and it comes with an Nivada stainless steel bracelet. The watch has a really attractive blue dial, which to me is an absolute statement for the summer and gets you excited for the warmer weather. The dial has applied hour markers, Eterna logo, and a square stainless steel applied window at 3 o'clock, so it kind of makes the date stand out. The dial has been refinished. If you look at where the lume plots are located, you can see that there has been a little bit of refinishing on those areas. What likely happened was the lume plots fell off, and so the dial needed to be refinished. The watch runs on the caliber 12824 automatic movement, which is an Eterna-matic movement. For those who don't know, Eterna really innovated in the space of automatic movements, and we'll obviously get into that in our article. But what they did was essentially use ball bearings to reduce the friction on the automatic rotor, which increased reliability and reliability of the automatic movements. So a really nice example, I think a great example for the summer. The next watch is from Omega. This is a reference 166. Let me get the focus before I get into this. It's a 166.0188 day date from Omega. As I mentioned, the 1970s produced unique watches with designs that are being appreciated more and more by collectors, and I think Omega is really standing out for what they did in the 1970s. This Omega was manufactured in 1979, so right at the end of the 70s, and it has a stainless steel case. What you can see is the sides of the case are polished, the top of the case is brushed, and then if you flip it over, you can see the case back. The finishing that you see, the brush and sort of polish, is likely fairly recent. The polish is just a little bit too new for me to think that it's original to 1970s, but remains overall a very attractive watch. The watch has a square cushion-shaped case with short flat lugs, very similar to the Eterna, as you can see, although this case is substantially larger. This reference came on bracelets, which actually made it fit in nicely with the general aesthetic of sort of integrated bracelets into watches, but this one comes obviously on this brown leather strap. The watch has a slate gray dial that's in good condition with applied hour markers and printed Omega name. The watch also has a day and date window at 3 o'clock. You can see below that minute's hand, and is outlined with an applied silver window, which makes it stand out on the dial. The watch runs on the caliber 10-20 automatic movement, which is a workhorse movement that Omega used in many of their watches, and can be found very frequently in watches from the 1970s. As I mentioned, this is a much larger case, so when it comes to fitting into sort of today's sizes of cases, you can't go wrong with this reference from Omega. So really those two pieces are from the 1970s. Unfortunately, this last piece is not from the 1970s, but I think it's a good contrast for what you can look at, because this watch comes from the 1950s, and when you compare it to some of the other cases from the 70s, this really shows you the contrasts in designs that watch manufacturers were experimenting with during this era. So the last watch that we will cover today is a Longines reference 1053 in yellow gold. Gifting watches was common practice in the 1950s, and this Longines tells that type of story. This Longines was manufactured in 1957. The watch has a 10-karat gold-filled case, which you can see is quite thin, and typical for the 1950s sort of design. You can see the lugs are also very thin, so overall this watch is quite a contrast to sort of the larger, chunkier designs that you see from the 1970s. The case was manufactured by Schwab & Vuspart Case Company and is in overall good condition. What's really important about this specific watch, and what we will dive into, is that the watch has a case back dedication that says E.A. Bruce, NCO Club Employees, 62959. The watch has a really nice silver dial with applied hour markers and printed Longines logo and name. You can see that the cross-hashed subsidiary seconds at 6 o'clock, that is recessed into the dial, that I think gives it really nice dimension for a fairly simple, complicated, not very complicated watch. The watch runs on the caliber 23Z manual wind movement, a movement that we've covered at length on Life on the Wrist with many of the watches that we've had in our possession. What's really exciting is, I think, to dive into the dedication. It's a very interesting story, and I think overall adds quite a different aspect to this watch compared to some of the other pieces that we've covered recently. So you can see the contrast of what 1950s or 1960s watches looked like, and then also to see what the 1970s really brought in terms of innovation when it comes to case design. And it's really exciting to dive into these watches as they gain more and more popularity, because I do think that the histories of them tell many, many interesting stories. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at the Omega, the Eterna, and the Longines. I think the 1970s is such a cool era of watchmaking. I've always kind of been a fan of the era, just in some of its quirks. As a great example, the Memo Sale is one of my favorite vintage watches. It was the first vintage watch that I ever purchased, and the Memo Sale, the Memo Sale comes from the 1970s and really takes on a lot of the design elements that were used during this era. So I think it's a really great example of how I've kind of always had an eye on the 1970s. I think today people are slowly getting more and more interested in this era of watchmaking, just given the move and shift towards looking at interesting case design. And I think there's plenty to come out of the 1970s when it comes to vintage watches and vintage watch enthusiasm. As I mentioned in the video, we will do an individual video for each of the pieces that we discussed today, so stay tuned for that. We will dive into the histories of each of the pieces, the references, the brands, and give you some more details on them. We'll also have articles where we'll have additional photos and images of the movements and case backs to give you some more information and sort of highlight some of the details that you can discover about pieces if you just look a little bit closer. As always, there will be an article on lifeandthewrist.com for this video if you want to check it out. There will be more images of these pieces if you want to see those. If you are new to Life on the Wrist, be sure to subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend who might be interested in watches. Let me know in the comment section below. My question for today is going to be, Do you enjoy 1970s watches? Yes or no, and why? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you are feeling generous and wouldn't mind liking this video, it really does help me out. With that said, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time.